Terce, in which William has an instructive conversation with the abbot. The cellarer was a stout man, vulgar in appearance but jolly, white-haired but still strong, small but quick. He led us to our cells in the pilgrim's hospice, or, rather, he led us to the cell assigned to my master, promising me that by the next day he would have cleared one for me also, since, though a novice, I was their guest and therefore to be treated with all honor. For that night I could sleep in a long and wide niche in the wall of the cell, in which he had had some nice fresh straw prepared. Then the monks brought us wine, cheese, olives, bread, and excellent raisins, and left us to our refreshment. We ate and drank heartily. My master did not share the austere habits of the Benedictines, and did not like to eat in silence. For that matter, he spoke always of things so good and wise that it was as if a monk were reading to us the lives of the saints. That day I could not refrain from questioning him further about the matter of the horse. "All the same," I said, "when you read the prints in the snow and the evidence of the branches, you did not yet know Brunellus. In a certain sense those prints spoke of all horses, or at least all horses of that breed. Mustn't we say, then, that the book of nature speaks to us only of essences, as many distinguished theologians teach?" "Not entirely, dear Adzo," my master replied. "True, that kind of print expressed to me, if you like, the idea of horse, the verbum mentis, and would have expressed the same to me wherever I might have found it. But the print in that place, and at that hour of the day, told me that at least one of all possible horses had passed that way. So I found myself halfway between the perception of the concept horse and the knowledge of an individual horse. And in any case what I knew of the universal horse had been given me by those traces which were singular. I could say I was caught at that moment between the singularity of the traces and my ignorance, which assumed the quite diaphanous form of the universal idea. If you see something from a distance and you do not understand what it is, you will be content with defining it as a body of some dimension. When you come closer, you will then define it as an animal, even if you do not yet know whether it is a horse or an ass. And finally, when it is still closer, you will be able to say it is a horse, even if you do not yet know whether it is Brunellus or Niger. And only when you are at the proper distance will you see that it is Brunellus, or rather that horse and not another, however you decide to call it, and that will be full knowledge, the learning of the singular. So an hour ago I could expect all horses, but not because of the vastness of my intellect, but because of the paucity of my deduction. And my intellect's hunger was sated only when I saw the single horse that the monks were leading by the halter. Only then did I truly know that my previous reasoning had brought me close to the truth. And so the ideas, which I was using earlier to imagine a horse I had not yet seen, were pure signs as the hoofprints in the snow were signs of the idea of horse. And signs and the signs of signs are used only when we are lacking things. On other occasions I had heard him speak with great skepticism about universal ideas and with great respect about individual things, and afterward, too. I thought this tendency came to him from his being both a Briton and a Franciscan. But that day he did not have the strength to face theological disputes, so I curled up in the space allotted me, wrapped myself in a blanket, and fell sound asleep. Anyone coming in could have mistaken me for a bundle, and this is surely what the abbot did when he paid William a visit toward the 3rd hour. So it was that I could listen unnoticed to their first conversation. And so Abbo arrived. He apologized for the intrusion, repeated his welcome, and said that he had to speak with William privately about a very serious matter. He began by congratulating his guest on the skill demonstrated in the business of the horse, and asked how he had been able to give such confident information about an animal he had never seen. William explained to him briefly and with detachment the path he had followed, and the abbot complimented him highly on his acumen. He said he would have expected nothing less from a man preceded by a reputation for great wisdom. He said he had received a letter from the abbot of Farfa that not only spoke of William's mission for the emperor, which they would discuss in the coming days, but also added that in England and in Italy my master had acted as inquisitor in some trials, where he had distinguished himself by his perspicacity, along with a great humility. I am very pleased to learn, the abbot continued, that in the numerous cases you decided the accused was innocent. I believe, and never more than during these sad days, in the constant presence of the evil one in human affairs. And he looked around, imperceptibly, as if the enemy were lurking within those walls. But I believe also that often the evil one works through second causes, and I know that he can impel his victims to do evil in such a way that the blame falls on a righteous man, and the evil one rejoices then as the righteous man is burned in place of his succubus. Inquisitors often, to demonstrate their zeal, wrest a confession from the accused at all costs, thinking that the only good inquisitor is one who concludes the trial by finding a scapegoat. An inquisitor, too, can be impelled by the devil, William said. That is possible, the abbot admitted with great circumspection, because the designs of the Almighty are inscrutable, and far be it from me to cast any shadow of suspicion on such worthy men. Indeed, it is as one of them that I need you today. In this abbey something has happened that requires the attention and counsel of an acute and prudent man such as you are, acute in uncovering, and prudent, if necessary, in covering. If a shepherd errs, he must be isolated from other shepherds, but woe unto us if the sheep begin to distrust shepherds. I see your point, William said. I had already had occasion to observe that when he expressed himself so promptly and politely, he was usually concealing, in an honest way, his dissent or puzzlement. For this reason, the abbot continued, I consider that any case involving the error of a shepherd can be entrusted only to men like you, who can distinguish not only good from evil, but also what is expedient from what is not. I like to think you pronounce the sentence of guilty only when the accused were guilty of criminal acts, of poisoning, of the corruption of innocent youths, or other abominations my mouth dares not utter. That you pronounced the sentence only when, the abbot continued, not heeding the interruption, the presence of the devil was so evident to all eyes that it was impossible to act otherwise without the clemencies being more scandalous than the crime itself. When I found someone guilty, William explained, he had really committed crimes of such gravity that in all conscience I could hand him over to the secular arm. The abbot was bewildered for a moment. Why, he asked, do you insist on speaking of criminal acts without referring to their diabolical cause? Because reasoning about causes and effects is a very difficult thing, and I believe the only judge of that can be God. We are already hard put to establish a relationship between such an obvious effect as a charred tree and the lightning bolt that set fire to it. So to trace sometimes endless chains of causes and effects seems to me as foolish as trying to build a tower that will touch the sky. Let us suppose a man has been killed by poisoning. This is a given fact. It is possible for me to imagine, in the face of certain undeniable signs, that the poisoner is a second man. On such simple chains of causes my mind can act with a certain confidence in its power. But how can I complicate the chain, imagining that, to cause the evil deed, there was yet another intervention, not human this time, but diabolical? I do not say it is impossible. The devil, like your horse Brunellus, also indicates his passage through clear signs. But why must I hunt for these proofs? Is it not already enough for me to know that the guilty party is that man, and for me to turn him over to the secular arm? In any case, his punishment will be death, God forgive him. But I have heard that in a trial held at Kilkenny 3 years ago, in which certain persons were accused of having committed loathsome crimes, you did not deny diabolical intervention once the guilty parties had been identified. Nor did I affirm it openly in so many words. I did not deny it, true. Who am I to express judgments on the plots of the evil one, especially, he added, and seemed to want to insist on this reason, in cases where those who had initiated the Inquisition, the bishop, the city magistrates, and the whole populace, perhaps the accused themselves, truly wanted to feel the presence of the devil. There, perhaps, the only real proof of the presence of the devil was the intensity with which everyone at that moment desired to know he was at work. Are you telling me, then, the abbot said in a worried tone, that in the many trials the devil does not act only within the guilty one, but perhaps and above all in the judges? Could I make such a statement? William asked, and I noticed that the question was formulated in such a way that the abbot was unable to affirm that he could. So William took advantage of his silence to change the direction of their dialogue. But these, after all, are remote things. I have abandoned that noble activity, and if I did so, it was because the Lord wished it. No doubt, the abbot admitted. And now, William continued, I concern myself with other delicate questions, and I would like to deal with the one that distresses you, if you will speak to me about it. I felt the abbot was pleased to be able to conclude that discussion and return to his problem. He then began telling, with very careful choice of words and with long paraphrases, about an unusual event that had taken place a few days before and had left in its wake great distress among the monks. He was speaking of the matter with William, he said, because, since William had great knowledge both of the human spirit and the wiles of the evil one, Abbo hoped his guest would be able to devote a part of his valuable time to shedding light on a painful enigma. What had happened, then, was this. Adelmo of Otranto, a monk still young, though already famous as a master illuminator, who had been decorating the manuscripts of the library with the most beautiful images, had been found one morning by a goat-herd at the bottom of the cliff below the edificium. Since he had been seen by other monks in choir during Compline, but had not reappeared at matins, he had probably fallen there during the darkest hours of the night of a great snowstorm, in which flakes as sharp as blades fell, almost like hail, driven by a furious south wind. Soaked by that snow, which had at first melted and then frozen into shards of ice, the body had been discovered at the foot of the sheer drop, torn by the rocks it had struck on the way down. Poor, fragile, mortal thing, God have mercy on him. Thanks to the battering the body had suffered in its broken fall, determining from which precise spot it had fallen was not easy, certainly from one of the windows that opened in rows on the 3 stories on the 4 sides of the tower, exposed to the abyss. Where have you buried the poor body? William asked. Into the cemetery, naturally, the abbot replied. Perhaps you noticed it. It lies between the north side of the church, the edificium, and the vegetable garden. I see, William said, and I see that your problem is the following. If that unhappy youth, God forbid, committed suicide, the next day you would have found one of those windows open, whereas you found them all closed and with no sign of water at the foot of any of them. The abbot, as I have said, was a man of great and diplomatic composure, but this time he made a movement of surprise that robbed him totally of that decorum suited to a grave and magnanimous person, as Aristotle has it. Who told you? You told me, William said. If the window had been open, you would immediately have thought he had thrown himself out of it. From what I could tell from outside, they are large windows of opaque glass, and windows of that sort are not usually placed in buildings of this size at a man's height. So even if a window had been open, it would have been impossible for the unfortunate man to lean out and lose his balance. Thus suicide would have been the only conceivable explanation, in which case you would not have allowed him to be buried in consecrated ground. But since you gave him Christian burial, the windows must have been closed. And if they were closed, for I have never encountered, not even in witchcraft trials, a dead man whom God or the devil allowed to climb up from the abyss to erase the evidence of his misdeed, then obviously the presumed suicide was, on the contrary, pushed, either by human hand or by diabolical force. And you are wondering who was capable, I will not say of pushing him into that abyss, but of hoisting him to the sill. And you are distressed because an evil force, whether natural or supernatural, is at work in the abbey. That is it, the abbot said, and it was not clear whether he was confirming William's words or accepting the reasons William had so admirably and reasonably expounded. But how can you know there wasn't no water at the foot of any window? Because you told me a south wind was blowing, and the water could not be driven against windows that open to the east. They had not told me enough about your talents, the abbot said. And you are right, there was no water, and now I know why. It was all as you say, and now you understand my anxiety. It would already be serious enough if one of my monks had stained his soul with the hateful sin of suicide. But I have reason to think that another of them has stained himself with an equally terrible sin. And if that were all, in the first place, why one of the monks? In the abbey there are many other persons, grooms, goatherds, servants. To be sure, the abbey is small but rich, the abbot agreed smugly. 150 servants for 60 monks, but everything happened in the edificium. There, as perhaps you already know, although on the ground floor are the kitchen and the refectory, on the 2 upper floors are the scriptorium and the library. After the evening meal, the edificium is locked, and a very strict rule forbids anyone to enter. He guessed William's next question and added at once, though clearly with reluctance, including, naturally, the monks, but I reject absolutely, you understand, the possibility that a servant would have had the courage to enter there at night. There was a kind of defiant smile in his eyes, albeit brief as a flash, or a falling star. Let us say they would have been afraid, and you know. Sometimes orders given to the simple-minded have to be reinforced with a threat, a suggestion that something terrible will happen to the disobedient, perforce something supernatural. A monk, on the contrary, I understand. Furthermore, a monk could have other reasons for venturing into a forbidden place. I mean reasons that are reasonable, even if contrary to the rule. William noticed the abbot's uneasiness, and asked a question perhaps intended to change the subject, though it produced an even greater uneasiness. Speaking of a possible murder, you said, and if that were all. What did you mean? Did I say that? Well, no one commits a murder without a reason, however perverse, and I tremble to think of the perversity of the reasons that could have driven a monk to kill a brother monk. There, that is it. Nothing else? Nothing else that I can say to you? You mean that there is nothing else you have the power to say? Please, Brother William! And the abbot underlined brother both times. William blushed violently and remarked, Eris sacerdos in aeternum. Thank you, the abbot said. O God, what a terrible mystery my imprudent superiors were broaching at that moment, the one driven by anxiety and the other by curiosity. Because, a novice approaching the mysteries of the holy priesthood of God, humble youth that I was, I, too, understood that the abbot knew something but had learned it under the seal of confession. He must have heard from someone's lips a sinful detail that could have a bearing on the tragic end of Adelmo. Perhaps for this reason he was begging Brother William to uncover a secret he himself suspected, though he was unable to reveal to anyone, and he hoped that my master, with the powers of his intellect, would cast light on what he, the abbot, had to shroud in shadows because of the sublime law of charity. Very well, William said then. May I question the monks? You may. May I move freely about the abbey? I grant you that power. Will you assign me this mission, coram monachis? This very evening. I shall begin, however, today, before the monks know what you have charged me to do. Besides, I already had a great desire, not the least reason for my sojourn here, to visit your library, which is spoken of with admiration in all the abbeys of Christendom. The abbot rose, almost starting, with a very tense face. You can move freely through the whole abbey, as I have said, but not, to be sure, on the top floor of the edificium, the library. Why not? I would have explained it to you before, but I thought you knew. You see, our library is not like others. I know it has more books than any other Christian library. I know that in comparison with your cases, those of Bobbio or Pomposa, of Cluny or Fleury, seem the room of a boy barely being introduced to the abacus. I know that the 6,000 codices that were the boast of Novalesa 100 or more years ago are few compared to yours, and perhaps many of those are now here. I know your abbey is the only light that Christianity can oppose to the 36 libraries of Baghdad, to the 10,000 codices of the Vizier Ibn al-Alqami, and that the number of your Bibles equals the 2,400 Korans that are the pride of Cairo, and that the reality of your cases is luminous evidence against the proud legend of the infidels who years ago claimed, intimates as they are of the Prince of Falsehood. The Library of Tripoli was rich in 6 million volumes and inhabited by 80,000 commentators and 200 scribes. You are right, heaven be praised. I know that many of the monks living in your midst come from other abbeys scattered all over the world. Some stay here a short time to copy manuscripts to be found nowhere else, and to carry them back then to their own house, not without having brought you, in exchange, some other unavailable manuscript that you will copy and add to your treasure, and others stay for a very long time, occasionally remaining here till death, because only here can they find the works that enlighten their research. And so you have among you Germans, Dacians, Spaniards, Frenchmen, Greeks. I know that the Emperor Frederick, many and many years ago, asked you to compile for him a book of the prophecies of Merlin, and then to translate it into Arabic, to be sent as a gift to the Sultan of Egypt. I know, finally, that such a glorious abbey as Murbach, in these very sad times, no longer has a single scribe, that at St. Gall only a few monks are left who know how to write, that now in the cities corporations and guilds arise, made up of laymen who work for the universities, and only your abbey day after day renews, or, what am I saying? It exalts to ever greater heights the glories of your order. Monasterium sine libris, the abbot recited, pensively, es sicut civitas sine opibus, castrum sine numeris, coquina sine suppellectili, mensa sine cibis, hortus sine herbis, pratum sine floribus, arbor sine foliis. And our order, growing up under the double command of work and prayer, was lighted to the whole known world, depository of a knowledge, salvation of an ancient learning that threatened to disappear in fires, sacks, earthquakes, forge of new writing, and increase of the ancient. Oh, as you well know, we live now in the very dark times, and I blush to tell you that not many years ago, the Council of Vienna had to reaffirm that every monk is under obligation to take orders. How many of our abbeys, which 200 years ago were resplendent with grandeur and sanctity, are now the refuge of the slothful? The order is still powerful, but the stink of the cities is encroaching upon our holy places. The people of God are now inclined to commerce and wars of faction. Down below in the great settlements, where the spirit of sanctity can find no lodging, not only do they speak of laymen, and nothing else could be expected, in the vulgar tongue, but they are already writing in it. Though none of these volumes will ever come into our walls, fomenter of heresies as those volumes inevitably become. Because of mankind's sins, the world is teetering on the brink of the abyss, permeated by the very abyss that the abyss invokes. And tomorrow, as Honorius would have it, men's bodies will be smaller than ours, just as ours are smaller than those of the ancients. Mundus senescit. If God has now given our order a mission, it is to oppose this race to the abyss. By preserving, repeating, and defending the treasure of wisdom our fathers entrusted to us, divine providence has ordered that the universal government, which at the beginning of the world was in the East, should gradually, as the time was nearing fulfillment, move westward to warn us that the end of the world is approaching, because the course of events has already reached the confines of the universe. But until the millennium occurs definitively, until the triumph, however brief, of the foul beast that is the Antichrist, it is up to us to defend the treasure of the Christian world, and the very word of God, as he dictated it to the prophets and to the apostles, as the fathers repeated it without changing a syllable, as the schools have tried to gloss it, even if today in the schools themselves the serpent of pride, envy, folly is nesting. In this sunset we are still torches and a light high on the horizon, and as long as these walls stand, we shall be the custodians of the divine word. Amen, William said in a devout tone. But what does this have to do with the fact that the library may not be visited? You see, Brother William, the abbot said, to achieve the immense and holy tasks that enriches those walls, and he nodded toward the bulk of the edificium, which could be glimpsed from the cell's windows, towering above the abbatial church itself. Devout men have toiled for centuries observing iron rules. The library was laid out on a plan which has remained obscure to all over the centuries, and which none of the monks is called upon to know. Only the librarian has received the secret from the librarian who preceded him, and he communicates it, while still alive, to the assistant librarian, so that death will not take him by surprise and rob the community of that knowledge. And the secret seals the lips of both men. Only the librarian has, in addition to that knowledge, the right to move through the labyrinth of the books. He alone knows where to find them and where to replace them. He alone is responsible for their safekeeping. The other monks work in the scriptorium and may know the list of the volumes that the library houses, but a list of titles often tells very little. Only the librarian knows from the collocation of the volume, from its degree of inaccessibility, what secrets, what truths or falsehoods the volume contains. Only he decides how, when, and whether to give it to the monk who requests it. Sometimes he first consults me, because not all truths are for all ears. Not all falsehoods can be recognized as such by a pious soul, and the monks finally are in the scriptorium to carry out a precise task, which requires them to read certain volumes and not others, and not to pursue every foolish curiosity that seizes them, whether through weakness of intellect, or through pride, or through diabolical prompting. So in the library there are also books containing falsehoods. Monsters exist because they are part of the divine plan, and in the horrible features of those same monsters the power of the Creator is revealed. And by divine plan, too, there exists also books by wizards, the Kabbalahs of the Jews, the fables of pagan poets, the lies of the infidels. It was the firm and holy conviction of those who founded the abbey and sustained it over the centuries that even in books of falsehood, to the eyes of the sage reader, a pale reflection of the divine wisdom can shine, and therefore the library is a vessel of these too. But for this very reason, you understand, it cannot be visited by just anyone. And furthermore, the abbot added, as if to apologize for the weakness of this last argument, a book is a fragile creature. It suffers the wear of time, it fears rodents, the elements, clumsy hands. If for 100 years everyone had been able to freely handle our codices, the majority of them would no longer exist. The librarian protects them not only against mankind, but also against nature, and devotes his life to this war with the forces of oblivion, the enemy of truth. And so no one except for 2 people enters the top floor of the edificium. The abbot smiled. No one should, no one can, no one, even if he wished, would succeed. The library defends itself, immeasurable as the truth it houses, deceitful as the falsehood it preserves. A spiritual labyrinth, it is also a terrestrial labyrinth. You might enter and you might not emerge, and having said this, I would like you to conform to the rules of the abbey. But you have not dismissed the possibility that Adelmo fell from one of the windows of the library. And how can I study his death if I do not see the place where the story of his death may have begun? Brother William, the abbot said, in a conciliatory tone, a man who described my horse Brunellus without seeing him, and the death of Adelmo, though knowing virtually nothing of it, will have no difficulty in studying places to which he does not have access. William bowed. You are wise also when you are severe. It shall be as you wish. If ever I were wise, it would be because I know how to be severe. The abbot answered. One last thing, William asked. Ubertino. He is here. He is expecting you. You will find him in the church. When? Always, the abbot said, and smiled. You must know that although very learned, he is not the man to appreciate the library. He considers it a secular lure. For the most part, he stays in the church, meditating, praying. Is he old? William asked, hesitating. How long has it been since you saw him? Many years. He is weary, very detached from the things of this world. He is 68, but I believe he still possesses the spirit of his youth. I will seek him out at once. Thank you. The abbot asked him whether he wanted to join the community for the midday refection after sext. William said he had only just eaten. Very well, too, and he would prefer to see Ubertino at once. The abbot took his leave. He was going out of the cell when from the courtyard a heart-rending cry arose, like that of someone mortally wounded, followed by other, equally horrible cries. What is that? William asked, disconcerted. Nothing, the abbot answered, smiling. At this time of the year they slaughter the pigs, a job for the swineherds. This is not the blood that should concern you. He went out, and he did a disservice to his reputation as a clever man, because the next morning... But curb your impatience, garrulous tongue of mine, for on the day of which I am telling, and before its night, many more things happened that it would be best to narrate.